The morning of May 19th, 1536, the cold stones of Tower Green. The crowd is silent. But this is not a crowd in the usual sense. It consists of about 1,000 dignitaries and officials, specially invited to witness the king's justice, a private showing, not a public spectacle. The execution is delayed for several hours. They are waiting for a skilled executioner from France, and this only heightens the psychological pressure. Then she emerges. Anne Boleyn. The former queen ascends the scaffold. She is calm, almost regal. Everyone expects curses, rage, accusations against Henry. Instead, she speaks words that defy logic. I am come hither to die, and I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. She praises the man who in a few moments will take her life. This is not just a woman. This is the queen for whom the King of England broke with Rome. She was accused of treason, incest, and witchcraft, and she knew it was all a lie. Even her sworn enemy, the imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis, who hated Anne, expressed doubts about her guilt in his dispatches. When your chief adversary doesn't believe in your crimes, it means they were truly fabricated. Her speech. It is not submission. It is an anomaly, a challenge thrown down to history. We will explore 3 theories that explain this act. Was it a maternal gambit, a desperate attempt to protect her daughter, Elizabeth? Or a political gambit, the cold calculation of a politician saving her family and allies? Or was it a holy gambit, with her immortal soul at stake? It's like 3-dimensional chess, which Anne played on the scaffold. A single move, but on 3 boards at once. To understand this move, one must understand the board it was played on. And it wasn't a board, but a trap. The accusations were grotesque, a conspiracy to murder the king. 5 men were allegedly involved: her brother George Boleyn, courtiers Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and a musician, Mark Smeaton. Smeaton was the only one to confess, after what we now understand to have been brutal torture. His broken will was the only piece of evidence in the entire case. It was a show trial, orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell to clear the throne for a new queen, Jane Seymour. And it proceeded with ruthless speed. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested. On May 15th, she was convicted. On May 17th, her brother and the other men were executed. On the 19th, it was her turn. 17 days, from queen to traitor. This time, pressure eliminated any hope of a defense or appeal. While Anne awaited death in the Tower, her former ally, Archbishop Cranmer, under pressure from the king, declared their marriage null and void. With a stroke of a pen, her daughter Elizabeth became illegitimate. Anne wasn't just being killed, she was being erased from history. Now, let's look at this through Henry's eyes. He is not just a tyrant. He is a monarch obsessed with the idea of an heir. Anne had not given him a son, and in his distorted mind, this was a judgment from God himself. He believed his first marriage was cursed because of a verse in the Bible, Leviticus 20:21. For him, this was not politics, but theology. He saw his dynasty as a line of code. If one line, a wife, did not produce the desired result, a son, he didn't fix it. He deleted it and wrote a new one. So, Anne is trapped. Her fate is sealed, the charges are fabricated, and her daughter is declared a bastard. She was like a chess queen, cornered by the enemy king. Instead of simply surrendering and being taken. Off the board, she made one last move that changed the rules of the game for all the remaining pieces. The first theory, the maternal gambit. At the center of this theory is her 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. Any word from Anne against the king would have been poison. It would have instantly confirmed the charge of treason, and that poison would have passed to Elizabeth, who had already been declared illegitimate. By cursing Henry, Anne would have signed her daughter's future death warrant, making her the child of an officially recognized traitor. This was not just a stain on her reputation. It was a direct legal threat. It risked a new act of succession that could have permanently struck Elizabeth from the line of inheritance. Anne's speech was not a plea. It was a legal shield forged from words. Her public submission became armor, protecting her daughter from the political arrows that would have been aimed at her for the rest of her life. It was a legally precise maneuver. By calling Henry gentle and sovereign, she publicly acknowledged his authority. She affirmed the justice of his court, at least formally. In doing so, she deprived his enemies of any reason for further attacks on her daughter. It was a public declaration of loyalty, purchased at the price of her own honor. But there is a brilliant detail here. Anne followed the standard protocol for scaffold speeches, but made one crucial omission. She did not confess to any specific crimes, not a word about treason, not a word about incest. She only generally admitted to being a sinner before God. This is not an admission of guilt. It is a legal loophole the size of eternity. Imagine you have 300 seconds of oxygen left. You can spend them screaming the truth, knowing your scream will poison the air for your child. Or you can spend them whispering a lie that will allow your child to breathe freely for the rest of their life. The choice between your truth and their future. Protecting her daughter is a powerful motive, but Anne Boleyn was not only a mother. She was the product of one of England's most ambitious families. She herself was a skilled politician. She spent her youth at the French court, which was an epicenter of intrigue and diplomacy. She was not a naive girl. She was a graduate of Europe's harshest political school. What if her speech was not just an act of love, but a final political move? If love for her daughter was the heart of her speech, then her political education was the brain that wrote the script. So, Theory 2, the political gambit. Anne was not just an individual. She was the center of an entire faction of reformers. Her fall created a gravitational pull, ready to suck in all her supporters. If she had accused the king, it would have triggered a brutal purge. Her enemies would have been given the perfect pretext to destroy everyone associated with her. Her speech was not a plea. It was a general's order to his army to retreat. A signal to her allies. The game is over. Do not resist. Save yourselves. Her chief ally, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, was in grave danger. A defiant speech from Anne would have given the conservative faction, led by Stephen Gardiner, reason for his immediate arrest. But she remained silent, and Cranmer survived. He continued the Reformation. Her submission protected not only her political faction, but also her family, the Boleyn clan. Defiant behavior could have led to the complete confiscation of their lands and titles. By accepting her fate, she minimized the damage. Her brother George, executed 2 days earlier, had chosen a different path. His scaffold speech was bold, full of veiled accusations. Anne knew this, and she deliberately chose the opposite tactic to save what was left. The result? Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was stripped of his offices but kept his life and property. This was the price of her humility. Let's evaluate this theory. On a scale of political cynicism, where 1 is naivety and 10 is Machiavelli, this move is a solid 9. To use one's own execution to preserve the political influence of one's faction, that is Grandmaster level. She lost the battle, but with this move she tried to influence the outcome of the war for history. Machiavelli's treatise, The Prince, was written just 20 years before these events. Anne had likely not read it, but the ideas of cold political pragmatism were the very air that all European courts breathed. Her act was Machiavelli in action. Mother politician. Both roles explain her calculation, but we are overlooking the central element of the 16th century worldview. What seems like a strategy to us might have been, for her, the only way to save something far more important than life or legacy. For us, death is the end. For a person of that era, life was just a short trailer before the main feature, eternity. And how you behaved in the final minutes of that trailer determined where you would watch the main film, in heaven or in hell. And this was not just fear. It was a science, a whole art of dying. In Latin, ars moriendi. At the time, these were popular manuals on how to properly prepare for death. To die a good death at peace with God was critical for the salvation of the soul. To die with curses on one's lips meant risking eternal fire. Anne's speech follows these rules almost verbatim, confessing her sins, forgiving her enemies, submitting to God's will. Her speech was not an improvisation. It was a perfectly executed final prayer, a final exam for entry into the kingdom of heaven. Added to this was the doctrine of the divine right of kings. This was not an empty formality. The king was considered God's deputy on earth. To condemn him publicly was tantamount to blasphemy. By submitting to Henry, she was not submitting to a man, but to an instrument of God's will. And here lies the ultimate irony. Anne was one of the main proponents of this doctrine. After all, it was what allowed Henry to break with the Pope and marry her. Now, she was trapped by the very ideology she had helped create. She could not condemn the king without destroying the foundations of her own worldview. So, we have three powerful versions: protecting her daughter, a political maneuver, and saving her soul. Most likely the truth lies in their intersection. But theories are one thing, and the reality of the final moments is another. Let's move from the why to the how. From the strategy of words to the physics of steel. Because in the last seconds of Anne Boleyn's life, there was nothing but her executioner, and the sharp blade of a sword. The sword was a perverse act of kindness from Henry. In England, the axe was used to execute nobility. It was a crude and often inefficient weapon, sometimes requiring several blows. But for Anne, the king paid a huge sum to bring a specialist from France. The executioner's name was Jean Rambaud, and his services cost the crown £23, the annual income of a skilled craftsman. This wasn't just payment for speed. The sword was considered the weapon of the aristocracy, unlike the commoner's axe, a final, twisted tribute to her status from the man who was destroying her. On the scaffold, Anne maintained an icy composure. She removed her ermine mantle, gave her speech, and then, turning to the executioner, joked, "I have a little neck." This phrase became the code for her fearlessness. At that moment, her ladies-in-waiting were sobbing uncontrollably. Witnesses wrote that Anne had to comfort them, not the other way around. She was not a victim on the stage, but the director of her own final scene, calming her weeping actors. Now, let's see it through the executioner's eyes. His task, a single clean strike before the victim's neck muscles tensed with fear. Legend says he used a trick. He shouted loudly to his assistant, "Bring me my sword!" Anne, distracted, looked to the side, and in that instant he struck with another sword he already held in his hands. Her death was instantaneous, but what happened next was the final humiliation. Her body and head were placed not in a coffin, but in an old arrow chest taken from the Tower's armory. She was buried without ceremony in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Immediately after the strike, a cannon at the Tower fired a single shot. This was the signal Henry was waiting for, several miles from London. Hearing the shot, he knew he was free. "It is done," he reportedly exclaimed. "Uncouple the hounds and let us follow the sport." The next day, May 20th, he was betrothed to Jane Seymour. 11 days later, on May 30th, they were married. For him, the cannon shot was not a death knell. It was a starting pistol, signaling the beginning of his new life. So what was her true motivation? Mother, politician, or saint? The answer is all three at once. These were not mutually exclusive options. In her final performance, Anne Boleyn simultaneously protected her daughter, saved her supporters, and prepared her soul to meet God. Her speech was not a single note, but a complex chord. One string played for her daughter, another for her allies, a third for her God, and together they created a sound that still echoes through history. From her defeat, one can draw an instruction manual for immortality. Rule 1, control the narrative. Even in defeat, you can control how your story is told later. Anne's humility turned her into a martyr and Henry into a tyrant. She won the war for memory. Rule 2, play the long game. Instant revenge is sweet but meaningless. Her true revenge was her daughter, Elizabeth I, one of the greatest monarchs in English history. It was a victory decades in the making. Rule 3, turn weakness into strength. When everything has been taken from you, your dignity and your last words become your greatest weapons. Anne used her complete powerlessness as a tool of influence. When Elizabeth first ascended the throne, she deliberately rehabilitated her mother's memory. She adopted Anne's personal emblem, the falcon, as one of her own. It was a silent but powerful signal to the world. The daughter remembers. Anne's strategy worked perfectly. Henry died, his male heir ruled only briefly, and the daughter of a traitor ascended the throne. More than 300 years later, in 1876, Queen Victoria ordered an exhumation in the Tower's chapel. The remains of Anne Boleyn were found and reburied under a memorial slab. The woman tossed into an arrow chest finally found a royal resting place, thanks to another great queen. But what was truly in her heart in that final minute? The cold, strategic calculation of a mother and a politician, or a sincere act of faith and submission before God and King? History has given its verdict. Now it's your turn. Write just one word in the comments: calculation or faith. Let's see which one wins today. Or perhaps her greatest calculation was to demonstrate perfect faith.